Hi, everyone. Kai Weiß here from the Austrian Economics Center. I'm based in Germany. Today, throughout the next hour or so, we will discuss the topic of Austrian economics, a European perspective. We have four great panelists with us today to discuss kind of what are the main challenges that Europe will face today, which are the ones that will lie ahead in the future. Also, what can Latin America, I know our audience is more from that continent, what can they learn from Europe? What can Europe learn from Latin America? And what is the role, of course, of Austrian economics in all of this? How can Austrian economics help us in tackling the big issues of our day? I will lead us through the discussion, but I'm only the moderator, so our four panelists are the stars. They are from all across Europe. They are from Central Europe, so we have someone from Austria. They are from Sweden. They are from Bulgaria, and they're also from tiny, but probably for Austrian economics, from the Austrian standpoint, quite important and quite illuminating, Liechtenstein. This is supposed to be a free-flowing discussion, so there will be no presentations. It will only be a discussion if you want. But you can also be a part of it, and I would highly encourage you to ask any questions that you might have for our panelists. Someone will then send it to me, and I will try to fit it into the conversation. So our four panelists, I'll just very quickly introduce them to you as I see them on the screen. I hope you see them in the same way. On the top left, you have Anders Ydstedt, who is from Sweden. He's an advisor at Scantech Strategy Advisors, which advises major Swedish industry and business organizations. And he's also the chairman of Svensk Tidskrift, which is a weekly magazine focusing on politics, economics, and culture, and was founded in 1911 and is published in Swedish. Down below, you have Barbara Kolm, who is the vice president of the Austrian Central Bank and is also the director of the Austrian Economic Center, as well as the president of the Friedrich August von Hayek Institute. And in that sense, also not just once, but twice my boss. So I think I have to be careful today with what questions I will ask her. Then we have on the right to me, on the right side, Krassen Stanchev, who is a professor at Sofia University in Bulgaria. He's also a board chairman, founder, and former executive director of IME, which is Bulgaria's first free market think tank. He's also a former member and committee chairman of Bulgaria's Constitutional Assembly. He was there from 1990 to 1991 and was one of the drafters of reforms leading Bulgaria from central planning to a market economy. And finally, on the bottom right, we have Prince Michael of Liechtenstein, who is joining us, not overly surprisingly, I suppose, from Liechtenstein. He is the founder and chairman of Geopolitical Information Service, as well as the president of a think tank called ECAEF, which is short for European Center of Austrian Economics Foundation. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, all the panelists. Thanks for spending the next hour with our audience. I wanted to start this discussion with very open questions to all of you, but I was trying to kind of figure out what is the situation in Europe, what are the main challenges lying ahead. And I wanted to start with Prince Michael, asking him, as sort of, he's the only one in this panel who is not living in an EU member state. And I was just wondering if he can give us, as sort of a semi-outsider, a look at what Europe is going through right now, what the EU is going through right now. What are the main challenges? How is it looking like?
Well, I would say that thank you, but I would say I'm maybe not a semi-outsider, but a semi-outsider. We in Liechtenstein, we are members of the European Economic Area, which is Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein being very closely associated with the European Union. But it's true, we are part of the internal market, but we are not part of the political union. Now, if I look at the situation of the European Union, I was always a big promoter of the European integration. I thought that it was very important. I thought lots of things were done. It's a very important project, a very successful one, if we want. But There are, at the moment, I think the European Union and the European institutions have since a while a problem to deal with certain issues. And one of the issues is that there is, I think, a too high wish to harmonize. And this wish to harmonize is not only coming from the institutions of the European Union, it also comes from quite a number of the national states who want to actually to transfer certain responsibilities up to the union level. But the union is part of this, accepting these things instead of saying, let's keep it small, let's do the national state what the really national states can do, let's do the region which the regions can do, and let's only get to the union level what only the union level can do. So this is, I would say there's a problem of centralization, but we have this problem also inside the national states. And I think lately we have the issue that we are moving from a decentralized democracy rather towards a centralized administration, bureaucracy. So this is one of the big concerns. The other concern I have is really in the financial matters and actually the excessive spending, public spending. We have it already since years, and now COVID is a wonderful excuse. Well, certain things have to be done to help the economy and give liquidity in the economy, as it was locked down for a while. But this excessive way, I think, is very concerning. And you know, this decision by the European Council, by the heads of state and government of yesterday, that every debt ceiling is given up and countries can spend as much as they want. And basic result will be, the deficit will be taken up by the European Central Bank, I think is extremely dangerous for the long-term view of the economy and the society. I think that the way is open to high inflation.
Thanks for that. I'll get very quickly in a second to Anders to ask him about centralization and harmonization. But for the moment, I was wondering if Barbara could jump in on the second issue of public spending of the recovery fund, as it is called, and if she could just explain quickly what the situation is on that. And also, of course, you not only being an expert on finance, but also on monetary issues, is there something which we as sort of Austrian-minded, I mean Austrian economics, when I say Austrian-minded people should be worried about today?
Well, thank you, Kai, for those questions, and thank you, Prince Michael, for leading us into the topic. Let me add one more thing. One term that we have completely forgotten is subsidiarity. Prince Michael circumvented it, but I think we have to also always keep that in mind, especially as Austrian economists. The subsidiarity principle should be dear to us. And then, of course, the second thing would be the rule of law. The rule of law is the basis for Europe, and we probably have left the rule of law when we first broke the Maastricht criteria already. Back then, long time ago, when Germany ran their first deficits and did not meet the Maastricht criteria, which are, the 60% of GDP, etc. We all know that. And then now with the COVID crisis, we have completely forgotten about all the rules that we have imposed on ourselves as the EU, and or as a group of nations of states who we have commonly agreed to when everybody joined the European Union. And then we started breaking those rules. And having said that, I will come to your question directly, both on the ECB and on the EU level with the Next Generation Fund, the 750 billion that are out in the market right now, or that will be pushed into the system very soon, leveraged actually. And on the other hand, we have had the ECB right at the beginning of the crisis throwing in their weight into the system as well, with exactly the same amount of 750 billion of the so-called recovery fund, COVID recovery fund. We have now a tremendous amount of money in the system. Question is, can we? How long will this last? We are in a period of very low interest rates, or zero interest rates. Actually, some parts even negative. Can we survive that? There have been answers by the Austrian school, by various economists, not only those long dead, but also living, especially from the US side, who have been warning about those issues and about this problem, and saying that this is not sane. There is no reason behind it. And the question of insanity is definitely something that needs to be asked for all the European member states, because it doesn't help if we bail out a country if the homework is not done. And by homework, I mean structural reforms. And as you pointed out at the very beginning, Krassen is the person who should tell us about the structural reforms that can be done and what can be achieved. And just one last sentence, because we saw during the so-called financial crisis, which was nothing else but a sovereign debt crisis in 2008, 2009, or 2007, actually, when it started, when it just appeared, that Greece was the first country to be bailed out. We have a government now, a reform government in Greece, that has done nothing else but structural reforms in the past almost 18 months. And all of a sudden, they have a budget which is in place. They have done a lot of structural reforms, and finally, Greece is back, or is on its way back on track. So there is no reason not to follow what the Austrian School of Economics suggests. It can be achieved and it can be done. And having said that, I think I'll pass over to the next speaker, and there will be plenty of other topics that we can cover.
Excellent. I remember when it comes to all of the excessive public spending, and that the EU called it the Next Generation EU Fund, when you said to me, I think a few weeks ago, that basically they called it like that because the next generation will have to pay for all of it, which was quite shocking for me, because I think you meant people like me. But
those who achieve and work hard and compete.
Okay, well, I will, after Anders, I'll go to Krassen, and so that he can explain to us what structural reforms mean from an Austrian standpoint. But I think Anders can also tell us something about it. And on some level, Anders, what is actually the problem with all of that spending? We are in a big economic crisis in Europe. We do have many, many different problems. Why can't we just spend a lot of money and tax big corporations or something like that to get that money, and basically just spend it to kind of stimulate the economy and get us back on track? What's wrong with that?
First, going back to the first question here, I think I agree with the previous speaker that Europe is in trouble today. We have a lot of countries have not come back on track after the last financial crisis. The economy is not in a good health, and now we have this crisis, and the politicians try to solve this way of printing more money, and but actually what Europe needs and the European Union needs is more better business climate for entrepreneurs, structural reforms, less regulation, lower taxes, and so on. But you have to rely on people that really creates wealth in Europe. And I think a lot of the business climate in politics in European Union is that they are more skeptical, or even they not really like people that create wealth in Europe. And there's some sort of agony against corporations that create wealth, and I think that's one of the biggest problem today. And talking about harmonization, I think what's made Europe previous as a strong part of the world is actually competition. It's competition between different systems in countries on regulations to get a bit better business climate, but also regulate competition on taxes and on different skills. And if you put on get the free trade in Europe, that could be a really good thing. But now we have politicians that believe more in controlling and regulating and harmonization. And I think it's not only harmonization. That if it comes to standards, that could perhaps be something that could be perhaps making trade easier for businesses and create a lot more, perhaps in the end, more jobs and more wealth. But the European way of harmonization is more like creating sort of European special regime or sort of excluding companies and ideas from other countries. And they are, especially now, they are trying to attack the American tech industry instead of making a better business climate for tech industry from Europe. So harmonization could, in some sense, if it's about standardization, it could be a part of a regular sort of a structural reforms. But I see most of it as more of a excluding our business to get into Europe. And there is also this ideas about creating a lot of the political ideas we can see in Europe today is they don't believe in the entrepreneurs, that the politicians think that they can create the business of the future, not only the depths of the future to pay, but also the business of the future. Sort of, they talk about European champions. The politicians should create air company, airplane producers, car producers, and so on, that have special rules for them in Europe. And I see a lot of the politics is actually to create a special business climate for state-controlled companies in Europe, and this is the wrong way to do it. I think going back, the only thing that really creates wealth is a rule of law and a good business climate for entrepreneurs. I stop there.
Great, thanks. And with that, I think we can just turn to Krassen and let ourselves be educated from his own personal experience on how structural reforms can look like. What should European countries do? And I mean, we can also, I think, say that Latin American countries can follow a similar path.
Actually,
what is that structural reform?
From an Austrian perspective, structural reform is something very simple. It basically means three things. Number one is liberalize, number two is liberalize, and number three is liberalize. So what's the problem of Europe? I basically agree with Michael. This is the so-called harmonization, but what is emerging, I believe, is something which Mises used to call omnipotent government. The problem with omnipotent government in Europe, in the European Union, is that there is a very complicated economic decision-making and very complicated political decision-making mechanism. So, which is not working. It's some sort of a trap. In order to get from that trap, you need several liberalizations. Number one, you need to liberalize economic and personal life based on private property and private choices. Economic development is always, there is a famous Hungarian, Peter Bauer, actually Lord Bauer. He used to explain economic development to the multiplicity of choices. So when you don't have that multiplicity of choices, you basically do not liberalize the economic life. In order to liberalize economic life, you need to basically resolve the issues with government debt. So if you look at the government debt situation today in the European Union, it's basically comparable to the worst situations in Latin America or worst situations in some European countries in the past, Greece in the 19th century, Bulgaria and Poland in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, or Greece in the last 10 years, although they're getting out of the problem. So in order to resolve the issue with the government debt, in order to liberalize the economy and reduce the taxes, you need some sort of a reasonable government spending. So reducing the government expenditures, keeping the revenues coming in the budgets in order to pay the debts, and when the debts are being paid, you reduce the burden on the citizens. And last but not least, liberalization means protection of rules of the game, protection of the contracts, and protection of the property rights. All these things are somehow eroding in the European Union, and they are not eroding only by the issues related to monetary policy, although the monetary policy at the moment is not Austrian at all. It's some sort of a vulgar version of Keynesianism. So another thing besides the monetary policy is the rule of law, and the rule of law is one of the things which is eroded by the European Union and the member states. Some of them, are much more advanced than the others in the erosion of the rule of law, but the European erosion comes from a very peculiar source, and this source, I would call it regulatory socialism. So this regulatory socialism is happening in our lifetime. It's more complicated to do business in recent years than, for example, 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, it was more complicated than the beginning of the 90s when Austria joined. And in the beginning of the 90s, it was more complicated than in the middle of the 80s with the European Economic Community.
Great, thanks so much. I think there kind of arises a sort of, obviously, kind of a back and forth between centralizing forces, between more harmonization on the one hand that the EU wants, but all of you sound like competition, decentralization might be the better paths in many cases to go ahead. And I want to go into that a little more in just a second, but we got some questions. And one of them is to Prince Michael, but I'll ask that when we get to that topic. The other one is to Anders, but I think all of you can join into that on some level. Namely, how much money, in a sense, can the EU print without kind of destroying its own economy? Is there like a limit, or can we just continue doing that forever?
Well, I think this question, I can't answer it. I don't know how far it can go. If I would have been asked 6-7 years ago about the figures we are standing now, I would have said this is not going to work. It still goes to work, but I know that there is somewhere a limit, and I don't want to be as pessimistic to say we have the choice between Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where we are going. But I think money where actually the only value behind this is the trust that you will get for this money you are getting now, you will be able to purchase tomorrow. When this trust is gone, we have a problem. And if people get used or governments get used, that they can spend as much as they want, and the money will come. This is not going to work, because there has to be a basis for it. So I can't give a certain number, but there is one science which I think is pretty precise. It's mathematics, and if you look on in mathematics, it simply can't work that you can, let's say, print and issue money forever. And the question is, and this is a very also behavioral question, is how far can you draw that? I don't know. I just know it is very dangerous what we are doing, because the danger is maybe not even so much from the quantity of money. The basis is for the misallocation. If we pump money into the system, if we pump money into government expenditure, that means that the role of government in the economy will increase more and more. And the wrong incentives are being given. So the economy will go in the wrong direction, become less and less productive and less efficient. And this is actually the big concern I'm having there. But I don't have the answer on the figure. I don't know.
Let me come in briefly on that. I'm glad that this question was not asked to me, but we have been kicking the can down the road way too long. First of all. Second, we have a lockdown crisis right now, and the enterprises are asked to kind of save the economy, but it was not their fault in the first place that we have now this issue, that we have now those problems. We need to allow the enterprises who take the risk every single day to be successful and to do their job as entrepreneurs and as risk takers, and to be innovative and creative, because these are the things that create wealth and nothing else. And after all that we need is equity. And this is a big issue in some places in Europe where we do have lack of equity. There are no financial markets in this way operating. Britain is a little bit different, but for example, in Austria, we don't have a capital market at all for equity, and this is something that we definitely need, and where we as Austrian economists can look into our textbooks and can say, hey, look, this is proven, this works in other places, this worked in other places, so let's free up the enterprises and let them do their job and not intervene too much. And what we see these days is way too much intervention, and it's all top down. And also in our first round, nobody used the term central planning. We had Hayek's Road to Serfdom's anniversary, and we should keep that in mind, that he was advocating against all forms of central planning, whether from the left or from the right, and this doesn't help neither the individual nor the enterprise. So unleash the power of free enterprise. This is something that should be at center stage in Brussels, and not the central organized planning and saving that they try to do right now.
Great. Before we get to Anders, who was asked the question in the first place, I'm really looking forward to what the number will be, how much money we can print. We also got the question, and maybe we can keep that in mind. It was asked how all of that relates to Latin America, how they have handled monetary policy, how they have handled fiscal deficits. Is there something that Europe maybe could learn from that, or what is the situation on that? But now, Anders, how much money can we print? What is the number? Is there a number?
First disclaimer: Sweden. I'm happy that Sweden is not a part of the euro at this moment, but still we are part of the same culture, the same regime with this low. The cost of money is very low, and this creates. I think before we hit the ceiling of printing too much money, we can see an asset inflation. If I talk as a entrepreneur, and that's creating a lot of problems actually. I think as Barbara said, for this asset inflation makes that the banks they look for safe investments in real estate and so on. That's sort of safe investments. And there's definitely problem for entrepreneurs to find money for entrepreneurship in these days. And it's hard to follow the development of the value of money. It's when money is so easy made on asset inflation. And secondly, that's a little bit part of what we're talking about now. But of course, on the political market, people see asset inflation, that the rich getting richer, but it's the same assets, just on the paper valued more, and that creates also a lot of disturbance on how people look about inequality and so on. But that's another thing. So going back to how much money, Sweden had a new state budget last week, and it was sort of the finance minister, she was really happy and said, now everyone can get everything. So she gives money to that and money to that, and the socialists got their pet projects, and also the Liberal Party got their pet projects, and so on. And of course, it will be paid sometime in the future. And it's not really real money. And I think of trying to answer Kai's question, I think it's important to learn from the European history that we have extremely bad situations with hyperinflation. And I think European politicians should learn from history, and especially in this area. There is nothing as such as a free lunch. Thanks.
There are a couple of points here.
Yeah, please.
So the question of the ceiling is very important, but also it's important to know the source of printing. And besides, the large printing program of the ECB, which goes into 1.35 trillion euros, just the buy segment. Plus, you have about almost 2 trillion different programs to be paid by the European taxpayers, which is also a source of destruction of monetary and fiscal discipline. So altogether, it goes. If you take today's 2020 size of GDP, the printing or subsidization, or you call it as you wish, goes into such ceilings like between 17 and 18% of EU GDP, which is quite unusual. Typical subsidization, including economic transfers, programs, and that sort of stuff, was about 2% of EU GDP. Local, meaning national governments and Brussels. With the next generation recovery plan after COVID, Green Deal, and the ECB policies, it goes into such unexperienced levels that it will be difficult to sustain the monetary stability, whatever the situation. One thing is also very important. The destruction of the Austrian type of operating monetary policies within the European Economic Community and then the European Union is fairly recent phenomenon. So one of the reasons quoted, although it's not the main reason, it's more disguised, was the situation with the Greek debt. But also there was a scientific, so to say, justification, like 2 years ago in March, Olivier Blanchard, MIT economics professor and then chief economist of IMF, was asked to provide the economic theory behind printed money. So, and Olivier Blanchard in March 18 had a very interesting article, which is now implemented by the ECB. Olivier Blanchard basically said, provided the money supply is equal to the projected GDP growth rate, that's perfectly fine. So the problem is that one is projection, the other one is life. So, and when you go into unexpected events in life, be this COVID-19, some other pandemic, or something happens, I don't know what, or a war or something. So, or a war, for example, in the Middle East, or war on the eastern border of the European Union, which affects, of course, the access to natural resources, gasoline, and other things. So, I mean, the entire projection goes into the roof. So, or into the chimney rather, So, I mean, it's a wrong and very much anti-Austrian view on monetary policies, which has been adopted in the last 2 years. And it took 3 sessions of the ECB board to move forward with the policies. And with new governor of ECB, it's already like a legacy of the past. And she is absolutely into this school of thought, which was basically absent. Or if it was there with Mario Draghi or somebody else before him, Duisenberg or whatever, so it was some sort of a hidden policy or tacit whatever intention, which was dressed into different whatever arguments, like the government debt of Greece and that sort of stuff. But it is a very, very strange shift of paradigm in money supply.
Yeah, one thing that I was told from the person in the backstage who sends me the question is that the question, how much money can we print, how much money can Europe print, was asked by someone from Venezuela, so he knows the issue probably.
I know how long one can print.
Bulgaria was in the situation of Venezuela for about 11 months in the second half of the 90s. So, and I believe that nobody will beat, I mean, after what Europe experienced in the past with hyperinflation, nobody will beat Bulgaria of 2006, 2007. So now we have, now we have a good opportunity, right? Somebody to overcome Bulgaria's first place in hyperinflation in the recent 30 years.
Yeah, let's have a contest on who does it worst on monetary policy. But in any case, I think let's jump into that whole centralization, harmonization topic, back to that. Maybe if we can keep the answers a little short, and I think we can take another 2 full rounds of questions and answers because time is already running short. So what I realized is that there's obviously this kind of discrepancy, or there's this back and forth on the EU level between centralization and national sovereignty or sovereignty of any other kind. And I was just wondering, Prince Michael, as someone from Liechtenstein, or as part of the Liechtensteins, do you actually feel like something like the EU and the centralizing spirit as a supranational entity, is that actually really needed? Doesn't your country kind of prove that we don't really need something like the EU at all?
Well, I think very much we need something like the EU in Europe. Not only looking from the Liechtenstein point of view, because we have in Europe quite a number of middle-sized and smaller countries. We don't have large power in Europe, unless we consider Russia. But let's put the way of Central and Western Europe. We don't have a large power. We can only prevail in global competition with a good collaboration of these countries. So I think an institution like the European Union is very important, and I'm very happy that this integration process has happened. But on the other hand, the strength of Europe is the variety. And it was already said before, the internal competition. The problem is, of the moment you have institutions, and there is, you probably know Parkinson's law, and institutions want to assume more and more tasks. And the moment this becomes too bureaucratic and centralized, it starts from the advantage of doing things together, which we should do together. It goes to the disadvantage that it limits. Now, I don't think that there is now, they'll say there are some national movements, etc. I wouldn't overweight this national movement, because if you look at the countries where they say there are more national movements and they are not there is not enough solidarity, etc. The approval for being part of the European Union is still very big. So people want to have their national or even their regional identity. Because, you know, if you take Germany, a Bavarian is first a Bavarian and secondly a German. But it's this identity and this sort of local roots which are very important. And I think it's very important to have an internal competition. But I think people feel as European, we need a certain European framework to be globally competitive. I think the internal market is very good. I was also very much in favor of the euro because as a businessman, I thought where it facilitates the things, it lowers the cost of transaction. And then I had to believe that as the European Central Bank, I saw it as a supranational institution, it would be independent from politics. I was wrong on that, unfortunately. But I'm still know that we need to on that. And I think we have to work on this thing. And what Barbara said before, the rule of subsidiarity, internal competition, to have a competition of region, and again going more to the issue of self-responsibility and more free markets. This is the problem. So, and I don't think it has something to do that we have the European Union. I think some of the over-bureaucracy is homemade in the national governments, or most of it. And we must not forget what happens in the European Union is the common wish of the national governments.
Great, thanks. The subsidiarity principle was again mentioned, and I'm not sure if everyone who maybe listens to it knows exactly what the subsidiarity principle is. So I was just wondering if Barbara could explain that. How would it concretely manifest itself on the EU level?
With pleasure. The subsidiarity principle, put it in simple terms or words, is as what you can do on the regional level or on the local level actually should be done at the local level. What needs to be done at the national or regional level has to be done at a national level, and only then you go to the supranational level. So, in other words, more direct. It's very direct democracy. It's, you know, people voting with their feet. It's people being involved in democracy and the decisions being made there where the action is taken, and not from far away. And I think this is very important. If we look back in history, and Europe has always been economically most successful when regions in Europe were competing with each other. And I think one important term that we should also put into this discussion is we as Austrian economists believe in the division of labor. And we should do that in Europe. And this is what the four freedoms are also about. Let those regions or those local groups do what they can do best in their place, and let the others do other things. And out of that, be competitive with other parts of the world. Because after all, you know, the new G7 or G8 is not France against Britain, against Germany, and against the US and the rest of the world. It should be Europe against or in competition with other parts of the world. And this is why we need those four freedoms at place in Europe. and subsidiarity principle in order to be most competitive. Sorry for being so long with the short question. But if we could come back, maybe in the next round, we should also think, or maybe Anders could cover that, the new taxes that are being imposed on us at the European level, whether it's the tax on non-recyclable plastic starting from January 1st, 2021, or whether it's the tax on digital services, which will also start on January 21st, and the new one on carbon adjustment mechanism at the EU borders, which will be implemented in January 1st, 2023. And there's also the discussion on the financial transaction tax sooner or later. All those should be European taxes to finance the Next Generation EU fund, which is, not very, which doesn't make much sense. And I don't think that EU taxes will help us get out of the issues that we have right now. So please, Anders, cover that, because I think it's very important that we also discuss it in our European sense.
Yes, Anders, please go ahead, and you can talk as long. I just want to say, talk as long until Krassen is back, but now he's back. But so you can still talk. Please.
No, but I agree. I think all those ideas about European taxes on taxes from the Brussels level is, of course, all of those taxes are questionable in all respects. But most of all, I think it's questionable that the European Union could have the capacity of imposing taxes on businesses, on people on their own. I think that's the first road that we should turn away from at all, because if we open that door, then we can ask the same question as before: how much money can we print in Europe? If we open that door, we can also ask how much taxes could we put from that level, because it's far from the most part of Europe. It's far away in Brussels, and the responsibility on the politicians and even on the Commission especially is very far from the voters. So it's the taxes on the European level we should be fighting as hard as possible. Then going into those different tax initiatives, I always think about sort of a business perspective. Here we throw away 800 billion euros, don't really knowing what to do with them, and then we have to find out ways to finance them. And then we say that we, for instance, introduce tech taxes on tech business. And most politicians say we have this. They talk about digitalization as the most important issue for Europe to create more value and better business climate and so on. We should digitalize everything. It's on the agenda for most politicians. And what are then their ideas about how to do that? To introduce tech taxes on those kind of business, on digital businesses. Is that the first way to promote something, to start with a tax on it? I don't think so. And I think actually it's a problem. It's not only a problem in money, because it's also sort of bureaucracy. We already have introduced European tax systems on VAT, on digital service taxes. That's one of my, I've been hit by that tax myself. And it's not the money, but the regulation. They're trying to find out ways to cope, and they talk about harmonization. In one decision from Brussels, I had to cope with 82 levels of VAT in Europe. And they call that sort of making it easier for businesses. Instead of using my Swedish VAT level when I was selling digital services, I had to use 82 different levels and had to find out which one to use. So I'm afraid not only for the level of the taxes, I'm also very much afraid about how how those taxes are designed. And the history that if you track back in history, it's not a fine history from designing taxes European level. But I think we should also think about these taxes as, I think it's in some way, it's not only about introducing taxes, it's also they try to blame game. We try to get money from it's our money, or should it be this money from paid in one country or paid in another country? And I think they're moving the problem into the future. So they say, here is the pot of gold at the end of the we can see in the horizon, and they say we have a lot of gold getting from businesses like Amazon and Facebook and so on if they pay taxes in Europe. But actually, it's the same money. There is no more money to tax actually, and I think a lot of those politicians actually know that, but they try to sell that message to the voters that there is a pot of gold somewhere, but actually it's the same pot of gold that should be shared between all of us. So that's sort of, in some way, you could actually, I think you should even call it a scam in some way to solve it.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And with that, I think let's turn to sort of the final round of questions, and we can start with Krassen and then go through Prince Michael, Barbara, and then Anders. Please keep it to like 1 or 2 minutes because we have 5 more minutes. And I think the only reason why I'm the moderator is because I'm German and I always have to stop on time. So kind of after, I know Anders just told us some very depressing things, but when it comes to the future of Europe, Krassen, are you optimistic when you look into the future? What would make you optimistic?
Future of Europe or the euro?
Yeah. Well, that's up to you to decide.
So I never expected that the European Union will be such an exemplification of the public choice theory. So what Anders explained, this is one of the explanatory principles of taxation in public choice. You promise to give in order to take, So that's very strange.
Mm.
And I believe, retaining this policy, which is obviously happening as we speak, and with new taxes from the next year, and then the Green Deal and other things, which are in the pipeline. I think this will motivate much more. It is not already Euroscepticism. It is a process which is very similar to Catalonia, which is very similar to anything you would expect, from people who would like to vote by exiting. And it will either increase the deficiency or it will lead to the solution of the union. If the union survives, next 7 years, probably there will be something positive. But for the time being, instead, and this is very, very visible, I think, from Brexit. Basically, so-called Brexiteers or voters in the United Kingdom, they were basically disappointed by the lack of the so-called negative legitimacy. If you see that something is going on and it is wrong, it is bad, you don't have the power to fire them, those who are responsible. And in the European Union, we have this whatever strange constellation at the moment. Everybody is blaming the European Union for this and that, but we cannot fire anyone.
Prince Michael, your final comment. Oh, are you done? Yeah. Okay.
What I just want to say, and I want to put a certain grain of optimism. We have criticized a lot, and there's a lot which we can criticize. But I think what is important that also now we see more a train of centralization and a train of giving up subsidiary, of exchanging democracy or direct democracy towards a bureaucracy. But I think we have to hold up, let's say, the principles of freedom, the free markets, competition, entrepreneurship, because this is the basis for an economy. And I think it's a duty which we have as liberals, as citizens, as persons, to keep this flame high and not getting too pessimistic. We might have a few very stormy years ahead, but I think we have to keep the flame high that we are coming back to a system of more freedom, more personal responsibility, and also of more optimism. And I think one problem is also in our society, there is too much pessimism. So let's look forward.
Great. Barbara, can you join that optimism or not?
As an Austrian economist per se, I'm an optimist and I believe in opportunity. And we've always seen those boom and bust cycles. And the Austrians believe, as I mentioned, in opportunity, in competition and achievement principles. And if we allow those principles to flourish, and because those are, after all, European values, and we should stick to those values. And, you know, Hayek mentioned the creation, or was awarded the Nobel Prize for his creation of knowledge in society, or how he explained it. And the individual thinks and acts. And we as Europeans should stick to that. And we've always found creative solutions and advancements. So given those things, I'm positive. But we need to also stick to productivity and allow those values to grow. And by that, having said that, I think we will see good times for Europe as well very soon again.
Wow, this is turning so beautifully optimistic now. Anders, how can you end this?
I'm also optimistic, actually, because as an entrepreneur, I always see opportunities. And I think, as I before was a bit pessimistic about the tech taxes and so on, on the other side, we can always see that new technology and new ways to create business and so on always find a way through new regulations and to create more freedom and value to the users and the customers and some wealth also to the investors. So I'm always optimistic, and I think I actually like European Union as an idea for free trade and so on. So I think I'm optimistic.
Beautiful. So with that, I think we can end it on a perfect note. Thanks all to the panelists for joining. Thanks for the audience for joining us today through this hour. The next session is in 2 hours, 3 p.m. Argentinian time with Marian Tupi. And I hope to see you there because I think it will be great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.